So I've been leading what I call mushroom walks, and this is a somewhat common thing around the country, but I have my own flavor of it that I've been doing in Juneau for about 25 years. And in essence, we meet at a trailhead generally, and we talk just about the biology and ecology of fungi and how to identify a fungus or a mushroom. And then talk a little bit about the different edible, dangerous mushrooms and what to look for. And then we go out and send everybody out to try to find their own treasures in the woods. And we'll go out for about a half hour, and it's amazing, especially if there's kids around. It's amazing what they find. And so even if it doesn't look like a good mushroom year, you come back and rendezvous with all these folks that have been looking for mushrooms, and it's always a pleasure to see everybody's faces when they come back, and it's just like this whole bunch of mushrooms, all this different color and different kinds that people are like, what is this? Is this edible? Obviously the big one is this edible? And so then we'll go through each one, and to be honest, I don't, and even experts don't know the species of many of these, especially the small ones. But for the more charismatic, colorful ones, I'll know and be able to help with that. This year I decided to expand things. I'm going to Thorn Bay, Craig, Ketchikan, Petersburg, and then back to Juneau for a couple of more talks that I'm giving. And basically, I started collecting mushrooms in Southeast Alaska about 30 years ago. So a friend took me out, showed me the book, and we went out and we collected something like I think 5 different edibles the very first day that I went mushroom hunting. And I couldn't believe it because I'd never seen a mushroom. I grew up in Juneau, and I'd never really noticed a mushroom at all when I was going out hunting or hiking. And all of a sudden, this kind of world opened up to me. And so I was pretty much hooked, and I got all the books, and I would go out in the field and I'd identify all these mushrooms and bring them back and look through the books and try to figure it out. And that kind of parlayed into this kind of education component where I go and help people with their mushrooms and try to ID them and talk about ecology. And so for me, I think mushrooms have just opened up this kind of exciting time of year that used to be pretty drab for me. It's like it's getting dark. It's especially in Ketchikan, it's raining, pretty hard. And then all of a sudden, there's kind of this component of the woods that's so colorful and kind of captivating. And so I got pretty into it. In Southeast Alaska mushrooms, you have this kind of mix of mushrooms. You have a whole bunch of mushrooms out there that it's like they're little and brown and I can't figure them out. But then you have this huge component of mushrooms where it's like, this is edible, I can pick these to eat. And that's a little bit of a daunting task for a newcomer, because it's like, well, I've heard, you can die from eating mushrooms, and I don't, I want to be really careful. But with a good book and with some kind of with teasing out like the major groups that are dangerous and the ones that are easy to identify and edible, you can enter the hobby and you can go collect for yourself, and it's not a big deal. Golden chanterelles are one of the mushrooms that are really kind of like good to start out with, and one of the main reasons is because the gills, instead of being sharp and deep like many other mushrooms, are these little fold-like things. And not only that, but they go down the stem, okay? So instead of coming right into the stem of the mushroom, straight in perpendicular, they kind of run down. And so those are 2 really defining characteristics of chanterelles. Another whole class of mushrooms are the boletes. And the defining characteristic here is these little holes or pores underneath the cap. And so you can avoid all the different guild mushrooms that are very hard to tell apart by just focusing on boletes. And this is an admirable bolete, and it's a very good edible. Also really cool, it grows with western hemlock, and so you're only going to find these in the conifer forests around here. But kind of a really cool thing, and the other defining characteristic of this bolete is this kind of beautiful suede-like cap that it has. So another one I like to eat, and I've never heard of problems with people eating angel wings around here. Now I will say that there is some report of people in Japan that were made very, very ill by these, but many people eat them in North America with no problem. They're also really easy to tell because they don't have a stem, okay? So they have this little rolled part that attaches to decaying conifer wood, and they're bright. They're always this kind of like porcelain white color that's it's really kind of easy to tell. So we have that one. Another kind of cool one we have here is coral mushroom, and I've eaten these before. There are some that cause stomach upset, and so I'd be careful to limit my consumption to a little bit to see how they affect you. But I think of corals as just a cool thing that's out there in the forest that to be aware of. One class of mushrooms that you want to be familiar with if you really get into this is amanitas. This one's not, this one basically is not the famous Amanita muscaria, but it's called Amanita augusta. But most amanitas and the poisonous amanitas have a ring, and they always have this little kind of bulb-like structure on the base. I do want to mention really quick gypsies. And so this is a gypsy, and this is not a beginner's mushroom because it's not as doesn't stand out as well as some of the chanterelles or angel wings or boletes, but it always has this ring that's just about to fall off. It has this kind of wrinkly texture to the cap, and it has a very kind of fibrous stem, but these are very abundant and edible. I think I would classify mushrooms in the Ketchikan area into two different classes, maybe perhaps for picking. Coniferous forests with spruce trees and hemlocks, and big trees, good drainage. Now there are a lot of mushrooms in bogs and kind of scrubby forest, but not so many edibles. So where do you find this type of place? Like kind of near beaches is a really good place, I find. Near stream sides, kind of both these places have gravelly soils. And then hillsides with a little bit of slope, I think we get so much rain here that I think that mushrooms are actually, to some extent, looking for places where some of that water can drain through the soil. That type of area has a whole host of mushrooms. And then the other little habitat that I would talk about is kind of disturbed areas like parking lots or trails, this type of thing, or like gravel pads or lawns. So the shaggy mane is kind of a really kind of famous, easy to identify mushroom that only grows out of lawns or like gravel pads or even like logging roads or something like this. And so you could look there for that. Another one, the fried chicken mushroom, is not as common, but same thing. It's in gravel pads, road beds and gravelly trails and this type of thing. And then on top of that, you just have mushrooms out there that are super cool. I mean, not really edible. We have things like, I don't know, Hydnellum peckii, this kind of the strawberries and cream mushroom that sweats these beads of red, kind of almost day glow red droplets. We've got these kind of, well, chicken of the woods is one that's edible, but it's also just like these day glow colors, like bright orange colors that even if you're not into kind of the edible part of it, it's just fun to see that stuff out this time of year, and it's kind of cool to check out. And then also on top of that, you have kind of like maybe some kind of medicinal qualities to a few mushrooms. And now I'm not an expert at that part of things, but you have the bear's head, what they call bear's head around here, this kind of icicle looking one that grows off of dead trees that is supposed to promote brain health and be anti-carcinogenic. And you have some of the, well, I mean, I don't want to go into it too much, but you also have some of the mushrooms with psychoactive properties. And so I'm not going to be a proponent of that or like get into that too much, but to me, not even if you don't get into it, it leads to kind of the fascination, the mystery with these mushrooms that could be dangerous, they could be edible, they could be healthy, they could affect your brain. And it all kind of lands to this kind of like mystique of mushrooms. So, yeah. I would say that step one is to go with someone who knows what they're doing. I would say, for me, I learned by myself. I was kind of like, I didn't have a friend that really knew what they were doing, and I fumbled around and I figured it out, and that was kind of good. But if you go out with somebody that knows and you pick an edible mushroom, it's gonna stick in your head. If you spend a day out there picking an edible mushroom, you will not forget that mushroom in the future. And so that's step number one. Step number two, I would say, is get a good book. And so we can talk about the different books, but David Aurora has some really good books on mushrooms. There's a brilliant book out now called Mushrooms of the Redwood Coast by Noah Siegel and Christian Schwartz, and that book is just a wealth of information. And so those are the first two things. And then you can find mushrooms that distinguish themselves. There's a whole host of mushrooms that you're gonna struggle with, but things like chanterelles and boletes, chicken of the woods, bear's head, these are things that you really can't mess up with just a little bit of practice. So one thing to be aware of is the mushroom is just the fruiting body of the fungus. And so we kind of think of, oh, that's a mushroom, that's the organism, that's the plant, that's the fungus itself. And of course, this isn't the case. The mushroom is just the fruiting body, so it produces the spores for the fungus that's underneath. And so the fungus, you can think of that as, it looks like kind of like cotton candy distributed out throughout the soil. And so the funny thing is that that's a pretty mysterious thing in its own right, because once that stuff is underneath the soil, we can't see it. It's microscopic threads of cells that are distributed in the soil. And so we're just looking for the part, what they call the fruit, we sometimes call it the fruiting body. And the reason that we say that is because not every one of these kind of mushrooms or fruiting bodies really looks like a mushroom to us, because you have these things like chicken of the woods or bracket fungi that grow on trees, or you have things that just look funny and not really like a mushroom. Mushrooms basically come in two different types. So these mycelia, or threads that go underground, they either can be decomposers or what we call mycorrhizal. And so decomposers are actually eating, basically, old wood and decaying organic matter. And so oyster mushrooms, chicken of the woods, what we call angel wings, shaggy manes. There's a host of decomposers, and they're not associated with a particular tree. And so some of these decomposers can be found in these kind of disturbed human modified areas. So mycorrhizal mushrooms are a whole different kind of faction of fungi, and they are always associated the ones that we are looking for are associated with a tree. And here in Southeast Alaska, that's almost always spruce and hemlock trees. And so basically, the whole deal there is that the fungus is looking for a tree host, and it basically goes and it spreads and it forms an interaction with the roots of the tree. And so there's a relationship there, and it's a very old evolutionary relationship where the fungus is actually gathering nutrients from the soil, and so nitrogen and phosphorus and water, and transferring to the tree. And the fungus in turn gets its carbon from photosynthesis from the tree. And so it turns out that any given tree can have many different fungi associated with the roots, as many as 10 or 15 different kinds. And a given fungus can actually interact with more than one tree, many different trees. And so it's beyond me, but it's this kind of like whole interconnected web of fungi and trees in the forest that are interacting and helping each other grow. One of the things that I don't really recommend is using some sort of mushroom app to try to figure out your mushroom. I think the technology, the AI, is wonderful. You know, I think it's amazing what it can do. But we're talking about dangerous, you know, things that are potentially dangerous. And what they don't do well also is they don't do geography that well. So you might get this answer of like, oh yeah, your mushroom is Cortinarius da 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 da. And then you look that up, and it turns out the mushroom is only found in Southeast Asia or something ridiculous like this. And so the computer doesn't know that information. So some resources that might be available to you if you're trying to learn more about mushrooms. First, your local library's got books on mushrooms, and so check that out. And I guess the other big kind of resource is the internet, and one thing that's very helpful is Facebook. There's focused groups that you can join where you can just post a picture of your mushroom and say, this kind of looks like this, what do you think it is? And then you'll have 10 people chiming in. Half of them will be wrong, but it's pretty easy to try to figure out who kind of the experts are and who you can trust. And a lot of times you'll get an answer that it would take you forever to try to figure out yourself, that some expert on Facebook will say, oh, that's this. And then you look at pictures of that mushroom and you say, by gosh, that person's right. I really enjoy going mushroom hunting, and I probably go about 10 times a year or something like that. So I guess, you know, I've probably been out mushroom hunting about 400 times or something like this. But I do feel like the education component is something that really has kept me going, because to see the new enthusiasm of people that don't know, you know, are kind of daunted by the whole thing and don't know what is what and which mushroom is which name and which ones are edible, and to kind of break down the barriers to this hobby and help them kind of enter in a way that feels safe is rewarding to me.